Okay guys, looks like we missed Anti-Communism Week. So the White House announced it after the week was basically over, and if you didn't feel this great wave of national unity over it, that's probably why. But of course the timing for this isn't random at all. The proclamation was issued on November 7th, which is the anniversary of the October Revolution, the single most important historic moment where workers and peasants took state power for themselves. And this proclamation comes only days after Mamdani, a Democratic Socialist candidate, won the race for mayor in New York, where news coverage immediately began to use the word communist as an insult. Classic American tactic. Social democracy, socialism, and communism get collapsed into one word, so that any challenge to concentrated wealth feels threatening. The text of the proclamation itself is old Cold War fear-mongering. It repeats a familiar claim that communism killed more than 100 million people, a number that does not come from demographic research, but the Black Book of Communism published in 1997, and that book was publicly challenged by its own contributing historians. The historians involved claim that many of these numbers were inflated or misattributed, including deaths caused by war, crop failure, drought, and counter-revolutionary violence. Now, the proclamation also says that communism has brought nothing but ruin wherever it spreads. It silences dissent and destroys prosperity earned through hard work, which honestly sounds a lot more like what's happening in the United States. But the way things are phrased here seems to refer to a very common narrative that you might see floating around often, the collectivization period and the conflict involving kulaks in the early 1930s. The usual American image is that the Soviet government simply selected peasants at random, but people who lived there described it differently. One of my favorite pamphlets by Anna Louise Strong, Dictatorship and Democracy, someone who lived there for 20 plus years and spent time in rural villages, wrote, "The usual assumption outside the Soviet Union is that exiling occurred through drastic action by a mystically omnipotent police. The actual process was quite different." She explains that village assemblies of poor peasants and farm laborers identified those families who had controlled the best land, hired others for labor, or used violence and sabotage to block collective farming. She wrote, "It was done by village meetings of poor peasants and farmhands, which listed those kulaks who impede the collective farm by force and violence, and asked the government to deport them." Even just structurally, the conflict was not invented by the state. It was already present as a struggle between those who work and those who extract from that work. Strong compares this to the 1933 California cotton picker strike. In the United States, the state backed the ranch owners. In the Soviet countryside, the state backed the farm laborers. Her conclusion: in California, the will of the ranchers; in the USSR, the will of the organized farmhands. That, in its simplest sense, is proletarian dictatorship. The dictatorship of the proletarian, workers' control. So when the proclamation claims that communism destroys freedom, the question is, whose freedom? The freedom of employers to exploit, or the freedom of workers to live without exploitation? And better yet, what freedoms do we even have here in the United States besides the illusion of choice? But I think we should focus more on what communist and socialist labor movements have actually won through history, like the 8-hour workday, the weekend child labor restrictions, the National Labor Relations Act. Communists played central roles in all of that. Historic strikes, unionizing, and protests. Meanwhile, labor rights in the United States have been nearly frozen for 40 years. Drops in union membership, stagnated wages while productivity increased, not benefiting the people at all. Cold War messaging taught people to fear their own collective power. It framed shared control over workplaces as dangerous or impossible, and we're watching the results right now. So surprise, Anti-Communism Week isn't about honoring history, but rather about disciplining the present under a false guise of concern and remembrance for the falsified past. One that upholds capitalism, of course.